I'm the General Manager of Advocacy with the Global CCS Institute. I'm sure we've met many of you before in one of our webinars, or you have downloaded and read some of our publications. But in case you're not familiar with the Institute, we are an international think tank that aims to accelerate the deployment of CCS as a vital climate technology. We're backed by more than 100 members around the world, including governments, businesses, and NGOs. Before we get started with today's event, I would like to encourage all of you to join in our online discussion as we live tweet from the event. You can follow us on Twitter at Global CCS, and please use the hashtag at Global CCS21. We will make a recording of this event available in a few days on our website as well. Today, we have a very packed agenda. We will kick off with introductory remarks from the CEO of the Global CCS Institute, Jared Daniels. Then I will give a brief presentation on the key findings of the report. This will be followed by a panel discussion with speakers, leaders from the government and industry, including the US Department of Energy, Adnock, and Heidelberg Cement. This discussion will be moderated by the Institute's General Manager of Client Engagement, Jeff Erickson. And now, without further ado, I would like to invite the CEO of the Institute, Jared Daniels, to give his introductory remarks. Over to you, Jared.
Wonderful. Thank you, Galoran, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the launch of the Global Status of CCS 2021 report. I'm delighted to be here with you today as the new CEO of the Global CCS Institute, an organization that many of you know very well. Having worked directly with the Institute for many years as a government official, I am proud to have the opportunity to lead the Institute's talented team as we work to advance CCS deployment globally. When I look over the past 20 years of my career in clean energy and sustainable development, now is truly an exciting time for CCS. The CCS pipeline has been growing consistently since 2017, averaging a 30% growth rate per year. It is now seen as a critical element for meeting the climate challenge, with immense versatility in its applications, both for mitigating emissions and for carbon dioxide removal. We see building momentum in the number of both governments and private company leaders supporting CCS. To me, this feels like we're at the cusp of the next stage for CCS deployment at scale. Indeed, as you will hear from Galoran, there are currently 135 facilities in the CCS pipeline. However, if we are to meet our climate targets and achieve climate neutrality, we will need to scale global CCS capacity by a factor of 100 by 2050, requiring around $1 trillion US of investment over the next 30 years. This may sound daunting, but it's not beyond the capacity of the private sector to accomplish. What is absolutely critical is that public and private sectors work hand in hand to put in place appropriate policies that can drive and unlock investments. At the Institute, with our strong, diverse membership, including governments, businesses, and NGOs, and our global convening capability, we stand ready to help facilitate these partnerships. This year, we're releasing our flagship report several weeks ahead of COP26, a critical point in our climate journey. As the conference gets nearer, we expect to see more countries commit to net zero targets. And we hope the information included in the status report will strengthen the case for more countries to include CCS in their medium-term plans and long-term strategies. Before handing back to Galoran, let me say that I am looking forward to engaging with many of you in the weeks, months, and years ahead as we work together to accelerate the deployment of CCS around the globe. Thank you for the attention, and Galoran, back over to you.
Thank you very much for these remarks, Jared. Could I have the slides, please? And could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So I'd like to start the presentation with reminding ourselves why we need CCS. We need CCS in order to meet our climate targets and get to climate neutrality by the middle of the century. This is the conclusion of the groundbreaking IPCC 1.5 report, as well as other credible organizations such as the IEA that tell us conclusively it will be very difficult, if not outright impossible, to get to net zero unless we deploy CCS at scale. CCS, carbon capture and storage, is a set of technologies that capture CO2 emissions either from large emission sources or from the atmosphere and safely and permanently store them underground. CCS can help us meet our climate targets and also help drive the low carbon economy in a number of ways. As Jared mentioned, CCS is a very versatile technology which can be applied across a range of sectors in the hard to abate industry, including cement, steel, and chemicals. CCS can enable the production at scale of low carbon hydrogen, which then can be used to further decarbonize transport and industry. CCS can be applied to retrofit it to existing fossil fuel powered power plants, or it can be incorporated into the design of new plants to generate low carbon dispatchable flexible power. And last but not least, combined with bioenergy or through direct air capture and storage, CCS can help facilitate and deliver carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere. Undoubtedly, we will need a full portfolio of solutions, climate solutions and technologies, including renewables, including energy efficiency. But it's this versatility of CCS, the fact that it can be used to both mitigate emissions as well as remove CO2 from the atmosphere, that makes it such a unique, important, and valuable tool in our toolkit. Next, please. CCS has been gaining momentum for the past 4 years. The pipeline has been growing since 2017. Indeed, in the first 9 months of 2021 alone, we added 71 new facilities to our database, thereby increasing the total capacity of the CCS pipeline by almost a third. As Jared said, we have now 135 facilities around the world in construction, in operation, and various different stages of development. Next, please. As you can see from this chart, we have 27 facilities in operation, we have 4 in construction, and 102 under development. And again, as you can see, the new wave of CCS has been happening since 2017, and those facilities that are under development at the moment, we expect them to add significant capacity to the CCS global capacity in the next few years, which of course is great news for the CCS industry. It's good news for emission intensive industries which are looking for solutions in carbon management. And of course, it's great news for climate as well. Next, please. I mentioned that we've added 70 new facilities to our database in 2021. 41 of these are in North America, and 31 of the new facilities are, 25 of them are in Europe. And of course, this is because North America and Europe currently have the most progressive policies for CCS in place, and thereby creating a more solid business case for investment in CCS. Of the 41 facilities in North America, 31 of these are within the Summit network. These are smaller scale bioethanol facilities which have low cost capture, and thereby through having access to a common infrastructure and storage network, they're able to implement CCS and thereby showing the favorable impact of networks, the importance, thereby demonstrating the importance of networks. The combined network of 31 facilities will have a total capacity of around 8 million tons per annum. In many ways, 2021 was a year of firsts. We see a number of new countries entering the CCS landscape. And among these are, and I'll read from the slide, Belgium, Denmark, Hungary, Indonesia, Italy, Malaysia, and Sweden. We're also seeing new applications for CCS. We're seeing the first CCS application in LNG, and this is not in gas processing, but in liquefaction plants. We're seeing the first commercial direct air capture and storage facility in Europe. And of course, we're having the first commercial CCS facility which has started construction, and we'll hear more about it in our panel discussion. Next, please. So when we look at the drivers of CCS momentum, undoubtedly the key driver is the adoption of more ambitious climate targets and action. Net zero commitments made by more than 100 countries and by thousands of companies has driven home the necessity of CCS. And this has kickstarted a virtuous cycle whereby governments around the world are strengthening policy support for CCS. The private sector, seeing the strengthening business case for CCS, is stepping up, is responding by advancing new projects, developing new business models, and entering into strategic partnerships across the value chain. This has given rise to CCS networks as the preferred method of deployment. As we know, CCS networks help to reduce risk and reduce costs. And currently there are more than 30 CCS networks in development around the world. The role of CCS, of course, also in terms of facilitating production of low carbon hydrogen and carbon dioxide removal is also being an important driver for behind the momentum. And of the 71 new facilities added to the database, 18 of these are in the production of blue hydrogen. Next, please. So this map shows CCS facilities, commercial CCS facilities around the world. Red dots are those facilities that are already operating, and blue dots are facilities under development. Just looking visually at the map, it's very clear the concentration in North America and Europe. However, as I'll show later, there's activity going on in other parts of the world as well. Next, please. And this is the CCS facility pipeline in a table format by geography. As I mentioned, North America leads the CCS league table. It's got 16 facilities that are already operating and some 60 under development. Europe has only 3 operating facilities at the moment, but again, it's got a very strong pipeline with 35 facilities under development. And other regions are perhaps not as advanced, but we expect to see a rising number of facilities all around the world in the next few years in response to strengthening climate policy and other business drivers. Next, please. And this graph shows CCS pipeline by application. And of course, what's visible from this slide is the diversity of CCS applications. We see CCS applications in hard to abate industries, cement production, steel production. We have CCS in lower cost, capture cost applications such as natural gas processing, fertilizer and chemicals production, ethanol production. Of course, we have CCS in power generation, both coal and gas. And we have hydrogen production and applications, technology-based carbon dioxide removal applications through direct air capture, through bioenergy, and of course also waste to energy. What is also interesting is if we look at the earlier applications of CCS, those red dots, those were predominantly in what we call the low-hanging fruit, those sectors which had low cost of capture, such as natural gas processing. But when we look at the facilities under development, we see a much greater variety, and we see CCS facilities being advanced in applications such as power generation, which have been historically thought of as high capture cost sectors. This shows the strengthening business case for CCS around the world, as well as the costs, capital costs coming down steadily over the years. Next, please. Let's look at CCS walk through some of the key regions, starting with North America as it leads the CCS scoreboard. I mentioned that more than 40 facilities have been added to our database in 2021. But undoubtedly, the biggest news coming out of North America was the US's rejoining the Paris Agreement, which of course sends a very strong signal of commitment to climate action and also strong investment signals for CCS. The US passed the Energy Act of 2021, which authorized more than $6 billion of funding for CCS projects to 2025. There are a number of currently major bills introduced in the Congress, in front of the Congress, and if passed, these can augment the 45 tax credit potentially up to $85 a ton. Across the border, similarly, in Canada, in the current budget, there's a proposal to include a tax credit for CCS projects, and there are proposed regulations for CCS to be included in the clean fuel standard in a way that's similar to California's low carbon fuel standard. Next, please. Looking across the ocean, Atlantic Ocean to Europe, of course, in Norway, the government has given the green light for the Langskip or Longship CCS network, and which is now under construction, elements of which is under construction after a 10+ year hiatus in Europe. A CCS project, in fact, a network is under construction. And we heard from the Norwegian state minister yesterday that both in the capture and in the storage parts of the network, construction is almost close to 20%, more than 10%, almost close to 20% complete. When we look at EU more broadly, of course, EU's climate neutrality target and the ambitious 2030 emissions reduction target, combined with strong and strengthening carbon price, is helping to drive the business case for CCS. In addition, and in parallel with this, EU's 20 billion euro innovation fund is being a strong funding source for CCS projects. In the first call of the innovation fund, there were more than 60 projects that applied that have got a CCS component, and several of these have progressed to the final assessment round. In the UK, where I'm based, the government is announced and is aiming to establish 4 CCS networks by 2030, capturing 10 million tons per annum, with £1 billion allocated to support CCS development. And we're waiting to hear about the first 2 projects quite imminently within the next week or 2. Again, in Netherlands, the Dutch government allocated more than 2 billion euros through the SDE++ scheme to industrial capture facilities in the Port of Rotterdam network in the Porthos project. Next, please. Moving to the Asia Pacific region, I think the most significant news from this region is the announcement of 3 CCS projects for the first time in Indonesia and Malaysia. So these countries have entered the CCS landscape of commercial CCS projects. 2 of these are in gas processing, and 1 of them is in blue hydrogen production. When we look at China, of course, the 2060 carbon neutrality commitment, China is launching its emission trading scheme. And from a CCS point of view, probably even more important, CCS being included in China's 5-year plan for the first time are sending strong signals in terms of Chinese government's commitment to CCS as a part of its climate plans. In Australia, the Australian government enabled CCS to create carbon credits through its emission reduction fund, and has recently allocated 300 million Australian dollars in funding for CCS projects and networks, and additionally has announced more than 400 million funding for clean hydrogen hubs, including both green and blue hydrogen. And last but not least, Japan is continuing to drive transnational cooperation in CCS, with a particular interest and investment in blue hydrogen. And Japan received its first cargo of blue ammonia from Saudi Arabia within the last year. Next, please. Gulf Cooperation Council states, GCC states, already host some 10% of the installed operating global CCS capacity. There are 3 CCS facilities in the region, in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, and in Qatar. In fact, Qatar and UAE have both ambitions to expand. And again, this is something that we're going to hear more about in the panel discussion. In the region, a number of countries, and I'm going to read Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, include CCS in what's called their nationally determined contributions. These are the climate plans under the Paris Agreement, basically showing how CCS is expected to play an important role in these countries' decarbonization efforts. And as the Institute, we believe that the region is poised for significant CCS activity in the future, in the near future. It's got expertise, technical expertise, it's got immense storage resources, and we believe that power generation and hydrogen are going to emerge as new drivers or important drivers in the region. And in anticipation of this growth, we as the Institute are opening our inaugural first GCC office in Abu Dhabi to serve the region. Next, please. So in conclusion, the CCS story in 2021 has exceeded our most optimistic expectations. Against the backdrop of economic downturn caused by the pandemic, climate continued to rise on the agenda, thankfully, and so did CCS. But needless to say, and as we're approaching COP26, we know that the global response to climate action is still grossly inadequate. Again, as Jared mentioned, if we're to meet our climate targets, CCS capacity needs to increase by 100-fold over the next 30 years, requiring an investment around $1 trillion US. We believe, we know that this is not beyond the capability of the private sector. However, stronger policy is needed to incentivize and mobilize CCS investment. Next, please. What I mean by strong policy. So, of course, the private sector needs confidence in the business case to invest. And here is a list, a long list, almost a menu of policy actions, policy priorities, of elements. Just to sort of list them, we recommend that governments explicitly define the role of CCS in meeting their emission targets and their climate plans, because this shows the direction of travel and sends strong investment signals. Governments can create and should create bankable long-term value on the storage of CO2. We know that there are ample storage resources around. Storage is not a constraint, but they need to be developed. So governments should support the identification and appraisal of storage resources. They should develop specific CCS laws and regulations, clear laws and regulations, particularly as it relates to CO2 storage, that they should ensure all elements, all abatement options are on the table, including CCS. They should facilitate and encourage opportunities for investment in CCS network and infrastructure. This is a no regrets option. And if necessary, when necessary, provide capital grants or low-cost finance. To end on a positive note, we're already seeing a lot of these actions being implemented across the world to different extent in by different governments, and it's starting to show results. What we need now is more urgency, a lot more urgency. With that, I would like to conclude our presentation. Thank you, everyone. And next slide, please. You can download the report at our website, www.globalccsinstitute.com. Thank you. And with that, I would like to invite Jeff Erickson, please. Jeff, over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Lauren. And Daniela, if you could enable my video. I'm not able to put my video on. Okay. Thank you very much. As Lauren indicated, there is a lot of progress that we've seen, particularly over the last 12 months and more broadly over the last 4 years on carbon capture and storage. And there's still plenty of opportunity, plenty of need for policy support, for government investment, for corporate investment, and for technology development as we move carbon capture to scale. We're now going to put the status report into some context. And we're going to look at what is happening around the world that makes the progress that we've seen in CCS more relevant. We're going to hear some very diverse perspectives from our panelists. And I'll ask our panelists now if they can turn on their videos, please. And Ben, if you can show the slide as well. So we have 3 panelists this afternoon, or this morning and this afternoon. We have Dr. Jennifer Wilcox. She's the Acting Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Energy, based in Washington, D.C. Mr. Omar Abaid El Nasri. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company onshore, based in Abu Dhabi. And Mr. Jan Tulin, who is with Heidelberg Cement. He's the Group Director for Alternative Resources. So very pleased to have our panelists with us today. And I will first start with Dr. Wilcox. And Dr. Wilcox, if you haven't, I don't see your video on, so if you could turn your video on, please. And Danielle, please enable that. I'll ask Dr. Wilcox first if you can comment on the urgency of addressing climate change, and then talk more about the role of CCS in addressing it and what DOE is doing to advance CCS. Over to you, Dr. Wilcox.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. Do you see my video now?
Yes, very good. Thank you.
Okay, great. First, I just want to thank the Global CCS Institute for inviting me to take part in this panel, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. And as I noted when we spoke back at the Institute in May, we have very little time left to avoid some of the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And this urgency was underscored in August when the IPCC released its 6th assessment report, which warned that absent deep cuts in carbon dioxide emissions, the average global temperatures will exceed 2 degrees C above pre-industrial levels. Carbon capture and reliable storage, along with carbon dioxide removal technologies, will absolutely play a critical role in our response to this crisis. And for the last roughly 20 years at the Department of Energy in the US, we've been focused on carbon capture technology investments in the power sector. In the past 5 years, more specifically, we've invested $1.2 billion to develop carbon capture and storage technologies. DOE's budget request for the next year is asking for a 60% increase in federal investment in research and development for carbon capture, reliable storage, conversion of CO2, and its removal from the accumulated pool in the atmosphere. And this is up to $368 million just in FY 2022. Going forward, we want to expand our efforts to capturing carbon emissions from committed infrastructure that's expected to persist through mid-century, like natural gas-fired power plants, and also harder to decarbonize industrial sectors like hydrogen production, cement, and steel production. Earlier this year, the Department of Energy invested $75 million for R&D on front-end engineering design studies for carbon capture specific for the natural gas power sector and also these industrial sectors. We're also focused on improving carbon storage and operational efficiency, as well as understanding of the overall cost and de-risking strategies to reduce those costs. And these are all critical to enabling and supporting a CCS industry that's safe, economically viable, and environmentally responsible. We're also leveraging the work that we've been doing in CCS to help advance direct air capture in particular. Since January, our office has invested $33 million, and in June, a variety of projects were awarded to help create tools that will increase the amount of CO2 captured using direct air capture, decrease the cost of materials, and also improve the energy efficiency of carbon removal operations. At the Department of Energy, we also welcome the opportunity to work with the Global CCS Institute and our partners around the world to develop and deploy technology solutions like CCS and like carbon dioxide removal to meet the challenge and ensure that the Earth is a livable home, not just for us, but for our future generations as well. So again, thanks again for the opportunity to say a few words today, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Wilcox. And we'll come back to you in a few minutes with some additional follow-up questions. But first, we want to move to Mr. El Nasri. Mr. El Nasri, if you could turn on your video as well. ADNOC has made headlines around the world 5 years ago when the El Riata CCS facility went into operation. And El Riata captures and stores about 800,000 tons of CO2 each year from a steel plant. So my question for you is, why has ADNOC invested in CCS? And if you could, please describe the strategic value of carbon capture to ADNOC's business.
First of all, of course, thank you, Jeff. And I really would like to take this moment to thank Global CCS Institute for the kind invitation. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you all today with my esteemed peers on this panel. Yes, you are right. Riyadh is very strategic to us. One of the core investment drivers and primary factor is our commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And also, we coupled that with continuous push to maximize value from our fields and meet our objectives to free also natural gas to be used for natural resources. Riyadh is really important element as part of ADNOC value chain, because we would like to utilize all of our existing infrastructure to unlock new opportunities to capture CO2. And with CCUS, the most viable available technology, which will help us reach to our sustainable goals. Just last week, the UAE became the first country in the Gulf to commit to a net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And that is really welcomed by ADNOC, and we are happy to participate in this drive and to continue our pursuit, building on our Riyadh facility. Riyadh currently, as you said, captures 800 tons of CO2 per year, with a sequestration equivalent of nearly 1 million acres of forest. Therefore, and we saw really also our partners, our international partners, joining our efforts in order to expand not only one fold, but multiple folds, utilizing our existing infrastructure in order to expand CCUS. And soon, as I hinted earlier, during the coming few months, we will announce concrete projects already available in our business plan in order to expand multiple fold in CCUS. We saw the value and we really would like to continue. And we are also doubling down when it comes to capturing the whole CO2 ecosystem, from utilizing it for EOR or enhanced oil recovery, and also recycling that CO2 to ensure that it is kept out of atmospheric air. It's also, as a to end my note, it's really important, as mentioned by my peers, to have a CO2 ecosystem that is certified, unified approach, in order to encourage everyone to participate in this great transition toward a more zero carbon objective. It's really important for us to help each other to reach that target. And ADNOC will continue to be one of the least carbon intensive oil and gas company in the world. And we believe that in order to reach to zero carbon, the transition has to include the least carbon intensive reliable energy source available in our to our market and across our stakeholders. Thank you. Back to you, Jeff.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Al Nasri. And again, we'll come back to you in just a couple of minutes with some follow-up questions. I find the Al Riyadh facility and system really fascinating. It's certainly unique in the world as being the only full-scale CCS project on a steel plant, and there's other elements of that just make it really interesting. So I'm certainly looking forward to the additional commitments and plans that you'll be making in the next few months. Over to then Mr. Tulin. Mr. Tulin, Heidelberg Cement CEO, Dr. Van Acton, provided commentary in this year's status report, and we're quite grateful for that. In that commentary, he states the following: Heidelberg Cement will be the leader in the global cement industry on its transformation path toward climate neutrality. And what I'll ask of you as a way to start is, can you explain why the company has made this commitment? What's the business case in being the cement industry leader? And then how does CCS fit into your strategy?
Yes, thanks. Thanks a lot, Jeff, for this opportunity to address here during your launch event. We are a young member of the GCCI, but we are representing the hard-to-abate sector, which means for us that we have to work hard to get there. And why we took this commitment, let me first explain what is very typical for our industry. So first of all, our cement is used in concrete, and concrete is the second most used commodity in the world for building our society. So there is a volume aspect in it. And secondly, 2/3 of our emissions are related to process emissions, which are unavoidable linked to the use of the raw materials. And so even if you would be very 100% renewable energy, then we still have a major CO2 emission to abate. And that means we really have to decarbonize the path ourselves. And as we are a worldwide company and having, the biggest market share in Europe, where the policies and the frameworks are most, I would say, promoting to decarbonize, it is more than natural, not more than natural, that we take our responsibility, and that is meaning taking the lead. So what does it bring for us then as an industry leader? Let me say that first of all, it's a track that takes several years to develop. So it's really, you have to identify for your own sector the most relevant levers, which are really contributing and which are feasible on a not too long term, and which are impactful. And these targets were also verified by the SBTi, and we were the first company in the sector that got it externally verified that we are on track with the Paris Agreement, with our plans. And then on the R&D side, we developed the technology of recycling concrete and then use the fine particles of smart crushed concrete to absorb CO2 and to produce new building materials out of this. And this is, of course, by having invested a lot of R&D, gives us a competitive advantage there. And also in terms of carbon capture, we already started to do pilots in 2014 in Norway. And that gives us a good understanding of the technology. It gives also a good understanding of the partners that we have to work with. And definitely these kind of projects, they have a very long lead time, and being ahead of the curve will give us the potential to act faster now that the scale up is so important these days. Finally, we have also made, let me say, in terms of governance, we have worked on a bonus scheme for our management. All our management is, their bonus depends on the sustainability performance and on the CO2 performance, which is rather unique in industry, and which shows that all the company is supporting this and is behind these changes. And so therefore, we are on a good, solid track. Our customers, they value that. Our shareholders value that, but also our stakeholders, our license to operate. It is extremely important that they are 100% trustful of what we are doing in this path. And CCS is there, an essential pillar into our carbon neutrality strategy. So we already reduced our CO2 emissions since 1995 by 23% with the more classical methods, like using biomass-rich alternative fuels, improved energy efficiency, etc. But the unavoidable process emissions, we need to address them with CCUS technologies. And either it be CCU or it be CCS, in both cases, we need competitive and efficient capture technologies. And that is what we have engaged so much on. And we believe that while CCU has really our focus, as this is the most wanted solution also from our side, we have to acknowledge that for the short term or the midterm, only CCS can bring big full-scale solutions to our emissions. And that's where the importance from CCS is definitely 100% clear for us there. So that bring back to you, Jeff, as a first introduction.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Tulin. I was particularly struck by your comment that hard to abate means we have to work quite hard to get this done. And I would say all of us that are involved in this are working hard and thinking creatively about how to build the business case, how to prove the business case, both for internal and external stakeholders, and then actually get the project done. And particularly with the long time frames that we're talking about, the 10 years that Lauren mentioned to get the Langske project underway. That was originally called the Norway Full Chain Project, but it's a long process, but certainly one that's absolutely essential as we go forward. I'm going to ask all of the panelists now to turn on their videos, and we'll have a bit of a roundtable. And I'll be asking particular questions to individuals, but I would like to invite any of the panelists after the panelist responds to weigh in as well if they have an alternative point of view or want to respond to something that the panelists said. So let me start with Dr. Wilcox. You mentioned both point source capture and direct air capture in your opening remarks. And I'd like to just explore that a bit further. We know that currently point source capture is both cheaper than direct air capture and more scalable. But on the other hand, the scientific consensus is that we'll need to remove CO2 from the atmosphere to reach net zero emissions. So can you talk about how DOE sees the balance of investing in these two approaches?
Absolutely. So first, I just want to talk about net zero and what it means. Essentially, that equation, when we put carbon in the atmosphere, it means we have to take it back out at this stage. And so if we have technologies today where we can just avoid the emissions in the first place, we should deploy them. And so it's always going to be cheaper and easier to capture the CO2 at a point source to avoid its emission in the first place than to have to take it back out of that dilute stream of the atmosphere. But at the same time, like if you look at the policies that exist in the United States, we do have a federal tax credit called 45Q. And today that's priced at about $50 per ton of CO2 coupled to dedicated and reliable storage deep underground. But $50 a ton is really not enough. It's not a high enough price tag for a lot of the different carbon capture opportunities that are out there today. It's a pretty good price tag for something like bioethanol, for instance, in some cases, hydrogen production, where you have higher concentration CO2 streams. But if you look at streams like natural gas power plants, the concentration is very dilute in those streams, 3 to 5%. And in the United States, we don't have a demonstration scale project on what the actual costs of doing that would be. Same with cement, same with steel. So a lot of the efforts that we're investing in today are for demonstration scale projects so that we can make the costs more transparent associated with these streams, such that we can inform policy and that policy can be priced right so that it's not just affordable, for us as the government, but also just broader for the private sector as well. And that's how we're really going to be able to scale up CCS. Now, for the other piece of the carbon dioxide removal investments, we're now at a point where we can't just do one or the other. We're certainly at a point where avoiding carbon emissions is no longer enough. It might have been 10 years ago, but all the climate models are telling us we need to also take it back out of the atmosphere. And they're also estimating that we need to be able to do this on the order of gigatons by mid-century. And so if today we're on the order, if we look at the direct air capture plant that was just, was publicized last week in Iceland, that's capable of 4,000 tons. That's the Orca plant, Climeworks. Well, thousands of tons to getting to gigatons in 30 years is pretty significant growth. And so we need to be able to invest in the CDR technologies today also so that they are at the scale that we need them to be in order to meet net zero. So we are doing both at the Department of Energy, but we absolutely are prioritizing technologies that are ready to be demonstrated today for the sectors that have not received a lot of attention.
Yeah, great. That was really helpful. Let me shift for a minute from conversation about technologies to one about markets. And this is directed to Mr. El Nasri. Just want to know what you're hearing from your customers, your investors, other stakeholders about decarbonizing your operations in the oil industry, as well as your products. And related to that is there a premium for low carbon products, or is that the new baseline expectation? And you just have to do that to stay competitive?
Well, Jeff, as the global energy landscape continue to evolve, and especially now the recent events and the energy crunch, basically it's a wake-up call for all of us to continue our aggressive effort to meet our the baseline expectation to provide a low carbon products from reliable fuel sources. That appetite, we are seeing very positive signs. There is a huge hunger in the market. On this front, ADNOC is fortunate to occupy a unique position as both leading a low-cost, low-carbon energy producer, and we are pursuing new innovations to ensure that our products meet our customers' baseline target of low-carbon products. In fact, over the last 5 years, we've done in ADNOC Onshore alone. We've reduced our cost by 25% with initiatives to lower not only our cost but also our carbon footprint. So that pursuit is there, the appetite is there, and I strongly believe it is becoming the new baseline as we progress along the way.
Right, thank you. And Mr. Tulin, you mentioned stakeholder expectations. Can you address the same question with respect to what you're hearing from your customers? You mentioned license to operate from I suppose, both your customers, your shareholders, and other stakeholders. Can you address a bit more Heidelberg's perspective on that?
Yeah, I think it's obviously very clear that our stakeholders do expect that we are Paris compliant. And it's not enough to make a nice statement for it. It is important to show how you are doing this, how are you defining your roadmap, and then you have to demonstrate how you are making steps to really execute that roadmap. And this means that it's very important to be very transparent on your portfolio of initiatives that you have and how they can lead to carbon neutrality. And this is where we think, on the one hand, you have let me say, the scientific world, like the SBTI, who represents, and CDP, etc., who represent that angle. But our investors, they are asking daily questions. How are we tackling this? And we need to be transparent and very, let me say, clear how we are going to reach it and to have it substantiated with real concrete projects. And this is where we also then link to, let me say, our project in Norway with the Brevik facility, where we put the first CCS project in cement world into application. Of course, that's a substantial reduction for that specific plant, but it's important that this creates the basis for future investments further on, because we have 70 plants around the world that we need to decarbonize, not only one, and not only one located nicely in Norway. So this is what is really expected from our investors as well.
Right. So then let me turn the question to Dr. Wilcox. If you could just take the perspective of the government's role in customer pull for low carbon products. Maybe talk a bit about the U.S. government's view on procurement of low carbon products.
Sure. This is something that we're looking at and examining to understand what that impact could be. You know, as we're making just the pledge of net zero and what that means. Again, it's always easier to avoid the emissions rather than having to put them back out. And so looking at low carbon cement, low carbon steel, low carbon fuels, and you know, even concrete, which we haven't talked too much about, but cement, of course, is an ingredient in concrete, and so is sand and gravel. And when you look at sand and gravel, it's actually an opportunity to lock carbon away through a synthetic aggregate. And so when you look at all the infrastructure that we're ultimately having to build or rebuild and advance in the United States, there's definitely an opportunity to use these low carbon supply chains as levers to be able to drive that early stage impact. And this is something that we're looking at.
Right, often overlooked lever for driving CCS and other technologies to scale is that government procurement angle. But I know that many states in the U.S. and the federal government, as well as other governments around the world, are looking at that. I expect we'll see more of that going forward.
I hope so. The other thing I'll mention, though, about that is the private sector. You know, you see a lot of the corporations making net zero goals today, and you recognize that their indirect emissions like steel and cement are very hard for them to control, and those low carbon supply chains don't exist today. And so they're purchasing carbon removal offsets. You know, so one thing that we're also trying to strategize is, can we form public-private partnerships in order to really help, again, as another lever to try and advance some of these early stage pilots and demos.
Right. And let me just stick with the idea of low carbon products for a minute. Over to Mr. El Nasri. Earlier this year, Adnock announced a blue ammonia production facility to provide low carbon ammonia utilizing CCS. And you have an agreement with Impex in Japan for them to purchase the product. Can you say a bit more about that project?
It's really an exciting project and shows you one of the clear example of the hunger at the market. It's not only Impex, but we also receiving a lot of demand from Asia. This utilizing also our Riyadh project also to support the production of blue ammonia as a start. We strongly believe that hydrogen and its carrier fuels such as ammonia offer a real promise and potential as zero carbon energy sources. Adnock already is a major producer of hydrogen and ammonia, over 300,000 tons of hydrogen produced per year at our Ruwais industrial complex. And in May, yes, we have announced the first shipment, and there are also multiple shipments already in the pipeline, and it's ongoing. And there is also plans to build a world-class blue ammonia production facility at our Ta'ziz site in Ruwais, which will, build, our building on this customer demand, and also utilizing CCUS as the main enabler for this new product. Separately, also alongside with our partner MPEX, as you mentioned, purchased, there is also we are utilizing our infrastructure by using Adnock Fertiglobe to provide other Japanese partners such as Itocho and Idemitsu. So we are really excited about this new opportunity. It's created purely by market demand, utilizing the most viable solution to provide low carbon fuel. Back to you, Jeff.
Yeah, that's very exciting. And one of the one of the reasons it's fun to be in this industry is because the innovation and the various applications just continue to expand in developing low carbon products and utilizing carbon capture and storage. Dr. Wilcox, back to you. You mentioned that in the past, DOE focused its CCS investment on power generation, and now DOE is expanding efforts on industrial facilities. Just talk a bit more about that. How do you see the balance of industrial and power going forward, both in the US and around the world?
Sure. So again, thinking back at net zero, and you know, Jan, you mentioned earlier too, with cement, 2/3 of the emissions are associated with the process, right? The actual chemical reaction of calcining limestone. And so there's not a good renewable replacement for that type of process like you could do for heat and electricity. And so CCS is a great solution for cement. And so if, you know, when you're thinking about net zero, and if we're in 2050, imagine, and we're successful and we've achieved net zero, and you look around at how you've invested and what that infrastructure looks like, you know, hopefully we will have decarbonized cement by that point. And that will require investments associated with CCS on those plants today. But also, one of the things we're looking at in terms of power is what's going to be around, at least in the United States, in terms of power generation using fossil as a feedstock. And so we have to look at the ages of the plants today, not just drawing the box around the plant itself and looking at reduction of carbon, but the supply chain of the fuel that goes into the power plant. And so if it's natural gas, making sure that the natural gas supply chain is leak tight, because methane is also important, and minimizing the emissions associated with methane is critical. And so, you know, this is what we're looking at right now, is really imagining that we are in 2050, imagining what that infrastructure looks like to have success of net zero. And we're looking at investing in committed emissions, which are really looking at some of these natural gas-fired power plants that are expected to persist, or even coupling to renewables in order to provide reliable, clean electricity. And then also these supply chains that we have to rely on, like cement, where there aren't easy replacements with renewables. And so these are really the investments. The other thing that I would say, though, is leveraging the 2 decades of investing on CCS on coal in the United States. I think a lot of people don't realize is it, especially in the United States, when we, with the fuel that we use for steel production, for cement production, the fuel is oftentimes coal in the mix. And so when we can look at the data that we have, for instance, in the Petronova project, which was CCS on a coal-fired power plant in Texas, that same chemical separation process, that same data can be used to jumpstart application of that same chemistry, that same separation, to things like cement, to things like steel, so that it reduces the risk of those chemical separations on those other projects. And that also will apply to international collaborations. We are taking the lead and investing, you know, in some of these technologies, and we can use the data, we can use what we've learned to move down that cost curve, learning by doing, and applying it to other nations that might have a higher reliance on some of these carbon dense fuels in the future than we might. And so those are some of the things that we're thinking about and strategizing.
Great, very helpful. I'm going to ask one last question to Mr. Tulin regarding Langskip, and then a wrap-up question for all three of you. So, Mr. Tulin, the Langskip project, as we heard, is finally now underway, and you're building a CCS capture facility at your Brevik plant in Norway. What are some of the key learnings that you've had about the development process that you've been through, and what are some of the key risks and uncertainties that remain?
Yeah, it has indeed been a long journey and still a journey. We started roughly 15 years ago, and in 2014, so after a couple of years of talks, we have done the testing, and this was exactly what Jennifer Wilcox said, to see how the technology that works for the power sector, how it would work for cement. So we built on this experience from the power sector. But what we specifically learned, how the triangle between industry, government, and society can go together. So, the Norwegian government, with the body Gassnova, they have been fundamental to drive the whole process. At the same time, the NGOs, in representing the society, have also played a fundamental role to close the triangle, and we as industry could concentrate on that what we are good at, and that is developing technology that fits our plans. And I think it is a unique example how these three entities have to team up, each time making a step, showing your commitment, asking the commitment from the other parties. Are we going in the right direction? And this we see now we can go much faster in other countries, because we know how important it is to collaborate in that direction. And this is really, really helpful. And when it comes to remaining risk, I would say the main risk is to manage expectations. It's so much in the news. It's as if the plant is already operating and it will go, like easy. It's not. It will be our first full-scale demonstration plant for carbon capture. We are facing now with the construction next to a cement plant which has to operate 24/7. We are building a complete new facility. And then we are going to commission it. So, everyone thinks, okay, the job done, what's the next project? It's not job done. We are a lot of challenges ahead, so we should manage our expectations very carefully, both to governments, to society, and to our own industry. That's what's ahead of us, I think.
Yeah, excellent advice. So I'm going to ask one last question for the panelists, and I'll start with Dr. Wilcox. What should we all expect from governments, from business, from customers and consumers to accelerate deployment of carbon capture and to address the climate crisis more broadly?
Sure. Expectations. One thing I will say is one hope that I have as I'm in this position is increased transparency. I think that will be significant, and it will also help us to build trust. One thing that we're also doing, we didn't get a chance to talk about this today so much, but I'll mention it, is engaging in frontline communities and getting buy-in from regions, from folks that have not necessarily been around the table to be part of these discussions, to really understand how our investments will lead to benefits in communities that have often been left behind in the energy transition. And so this is something that we're definitely active in. And I think that, I hope that in a transparent way and offering that too, that will just help with the collaborations internationally. And that goes to also the supply chain piece too, that we've been talking about. If a customer wants to have access to a low carbon supply chain, the transparency of the emissions associated with the extraction, the transport, the conversion to making that material is going to be really important. Just like the food we buy, we kind of know what goes into it. I think it's going to be really important to be able to have that transparency for customers as well.
All right, thank you. And Mr. El Nasri, your answer to the question, what should we expect from government, from business, from customers and consumers?
as mentioned by my peers, collaboration is key. Transparency also is really key. A policy of unification and inclusion, whether it is CC storage or CC utilization, with proper measures in order to go through the accreditation process with a unified approach, to give everyone a fair chance to participate and be part of this very important challenge, because it's a global challenge. It needs the efforts of all of us and all stakeholders, whether it is business, government, customers, should work together in order to tackle this with the most viable technology that we have today. We need to build on it with R&D opportunities, as an example, with collaboration to ensure sustainable application and implementation across the world. Back to you, Jeff.
Right, thank you. And before I go to Mr. Tulin, I'm going to say, I know Dr. Wilcox has another meeting that she's late for, so I want to say thank you very much for your participation. Feel free to check out as soon as you need to before we wrap up.
Thank you.
And then over to Mr. Tulin. What's your view on what we can expect from government, from business, and from customers?
Yeah, let me say from cement is the end customer is often a bit further away. We are business to business business, and let me say, and the role of public procurement for low carbon, create demand for low carbon products, that's very important, because that will give an example, that will lead the way, and that helps next to, let me say, funding of the cost. Because finally, the product that is a low carbon product, it has simply a higher value than the regular product, and that has to be recognized. And I think while we're going there, I think that from governments, we expect that they join the forces to, for example, build up a pipeline infrastructure. We are, there is a cement industry here, there's the lime industry, there's the steel industry, and we all need the same pipeline infrastructure. And especially in Europe, that's lacking, and it will not be pushed by EUR. This is not going to happen in Europe. So it can be leveraged with the infrastructure that is needed for hydrogen economy, so that once you build up hydrogen pipelines, build parallelly the CO2 pipelines, and that will reduce the costs. And then let us work as industry on bringing the cost of our capture technology down. We will manage. Because we are engineering, and then we can make more applications with less government funding, because that is what has to fade out. Although we still need it now in a kind of contract, carbon contract for difference approaches. These are very helpful now, but we need to see this as a temporary measure.
Great, thank you. Mr. Tulin, and while Galoran in her presentation mentioned the need for policy support, what I heard from all of you is collaboration, engagement, transparency, and managing expectations. So that's a great way to finish. So let's do that now. I want to first thank all of the panelists for the great insights that you provided. And Ben, if you could put the next slide up, please. There we go. Thank you. So if you'd like to download the status report, you can go to globalccsinstitute.com in order to download that. If you missed any of today's event, or if you want to have some of your colleagues view it, a full recording will be available on our website over the next few days. If you follow us on social media at Global CCS, you'll be alerted when that recording is available. If you, we weren't able to get to the questions that came in from the audience. If you would like to follow up with us on those questions, you can send a note to info@globalccsinstitute.com. And if you're interested in seeing any of our other publications or hearing more about membership or our consulting services, you can also go to globalccsinstitute.com or send us a note at info. So with that, let me thank all of you, both the panelists and the audience, for tuning in today. I hope you have a safe, enjoyable rest of the week, and looking forward to seeing you once again next time. So long.